His daughter walked to the front, tears streaming, voice breaking. What she said next about her father didn't just honor a legend, it revealed the man the world never knew. The room fell silent. Every eye was on her. Nabiyah B, carrying the weight of a name that had echoed across generations, stood before a gathering of family friends and fellow artists who had come to say goodbye to Jimmy Cliff. The reggae icon, the pioneer, the voice that had soundtracked revolutions, heartbreaks, and healing for millions around the world. But in that moment, she wasn't speaking to the legend. She was speaking about her father, and the difference between those two realities would break something open in everyone who heard her words. It started on a Monday. Latifah Chambers, Jimmy's wife, released a statement that rippled through the music world like a shockwave nobody saw coming. The words were simple, but their weight was crushing. Her husband, the man who had given reggae its global heartbeat, had passed away. The cause, a seizure followed by pneumonia. Two medical terms that felt impossibly small for a loss so monumental. Latifah's message carried a tenderness that cut through the shock. She wrote about profound sadness, about crossing over, about the journey they had shared. But more than anything, she wrote with the voice of a woman who had stood beside him through decades of triumphs and quiet struggles, now facing the impossible task of letting the world know he was gone. Her words weren't just an announcement, they were a love letter written in grief. She thanked his family, his friends, his fellow artists, and the co-workers who had walked alongside him through his extraordinary career. But then she turned her attention to the people who had lifted him from the hills of St. James Parish to stages across every continent. The fans. She wanted them to know something crucial, something Jimmy had felt deeply but never shouted from rooftops. Your support was his strength throughout his whole career. He really appreciated each and every fan for their love. Anyone who had ever met Jimmy Cliff spoke about his warmth, his humility, the way he made you feel seen, even in a crowded room. He never carried himself like a star who had conquered the world. He carried himself like a man who understood that music was a conversation, not a performance, a dialogue between soul and community. And his wife's words reflected that spirit perfectly. They reminded the world that behind every anthem, every tour, every moment of brilliance, there was a man who genuinely cherished the people who believed in him. Latifah didn't stop there. She acknowledged the medical team that had fought alongside them in those final agonizing days. Dr. Ciro and the hospital staff, who had been, in her words, extremely supportive and helpful during the most difficult process imaginable. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, into the late-night vigils, the wavering hope, the small, terrifying moments, when the people who loved him most watched his body begin to surrender. The public only learned of his passing once it was final, but the pain had been carving itself into his family long before that. And then came the message that shattered hearts across the globe. Jimmy, my darling, may you rest in peace. I will follow your wishes. I hope you all can respect our privacy during these hard times. Further information will be provided at a later date. See you, and we see you. Legend. That phrase, Jimmy, my darling, it pulled back the veil on the public tragedy and revealed the personal one. The heartbreak of a wife watching her partner of many years transform from the man she held every day into a memory the world would now revere. Before he was an icon, he was hers, a husband, a father, a man whose presence was felt most profoundly in the quiet everyday spaces of life. And now, in the loudest silence imaginable, she had to say goodbye. Jimmy Cliff's passing wasn't just the loss of a musician. It was the closing of a chapter in global cultural history. This was the man who helped define what reggae could be, who carried its messages of unity, liberation, struggle, and spiritual elevation to every corner of the earth. Long before the world embraced reggae, Jimmy Cliff was out there touring relentlessly, singing with a conviction that could break through barriers even when most people didn't yet understand the movement rising from Jamaica's soil. His voice was piercing, emotional, unmistakably sincere, a voice that could shift from sorrow to hope within a single chorus, capturing the complexity of Caribbean life and the resilience of its people. His songs weren't just hits. They were emotional testament, living proof that music rooted in truth could transcend borders, politics, and language. Many Rivers to Cross became an anthem of pain, perseverance, and redemption. It was the song you turned to when life felt impossible, when the weight of the world pressed down and you needed to know someone else had felt that same crushing heaviness and survived it. Jimmy's voice on that track didn't just tell a story. It lived inside the story, Every note carried the ache of experience, the exhaustion of the fight, and the stubborn refusal to give up. The Harder They Come didn't just soundtrack a film. It changed the course of Jamaican cinema and introduced reggae to millions who had never heard its rhythms before. The movie became a cultural earthquake, and Jimmy was at its center, playing a character whose struggle mirrored the very battles he had fought in his own life. The lines between art and reality blurred, and suddenly the world was paying attention to a sound, a movement, a spirit that had been building for years in the streets and studios of Kingston. You Can Get It If You Really Want, Sitting in Limbo, Vietnam, each one became a cultural marker. The kind of song that grows with you, morphing in meaning as your life evolves, as the world shifts, as you begin to understand layers you didn't catch the first time. To this day, artists across every genre cite Jimmy Cliff as a guiding light, a reminder that music doesn't just entertain, it teaches, it heals, it fights. But behind the scenes, away from the stages and the studios and the screaming crowds, Jimmy Cliff was known for something else, an energy that seemed to defy age. People who worked with him often said the same thing. He was sharp, witty, filled with a contagious optimism that made you believe anything was possible. Even as he got older, even as his body began showing signs of wear, he continued to create, to perform, to push reggae into spaces it had never been. His wife and children were his grounding force, the anchor behind every tour, every studio session, every reinvention. Latifah Chambers had always stayed out of the spotlight, choosing to support him quietly, without chasing fame or public attention. Her announcement became her first major public statement, and the depth of her grief spoke to a love story the world rarely saw but deeply felt through his music. For his fans, the moment felt unreal. Jimmy Cliff was one of those artists people assumed would live forever, not because he was immune to mortality, but because his music had become woven into the emotional fabric of so many communities. His voice was present at weddings, funerals, protests, long drives, heartbreaks, and moments of triumph. He became a global companion, someone whose songs felt like conversations with your own soul. The idea of a world without him was hard to accept because his music had a way of making life feel a little less heavy, a little more purposeful, a little more connected. As tributes poured in from across the world, from musicians, actors, political leaders, fans, and ordinary people who just loved his work, one thing became clear. Jimmy Cliff was not merely a performer. He was a vessel of spirit, culture, and truth. His passing marked the end of an era, but it also cemented his legacy as someone whose influence would continue to echo through future generations of artists who dare to sing honestly, fearlessly, and with purpose. But Latifah's request for privacy reminded everyone of something important. Grieving someone so monumental is not just a public event, it's a deeply personal, intimate journey for those he leaves behind. The world could celebrate the legend, but his family had to mourn the man, and those are two very different kinds of loss. Jimmy Cliff's journey was never a straight line. It was a long, winding road filled with triumphs and obstacles that he navigated with the same determination he poured into his songs. Throughout his decades-long presence in the music world, he carried the spirit of a survivor, someone who had climbed through hardship, illness, industry betrayal, and personal tests, while still managing to spread joy, hope, and consciousness through his art. His health battles were never fully public because Jimmy was a private person who shared only what he felt necessary. But those close to him often spoke about periods when he had quietly stepped away from performing due to exhaustion, stress-related issues, and recurring respiratory problems. As he aged, these issues became more frequent. Yet he continued performing well into his 70s, pushing through pain because the stage was where he felt most alive. In later years, he experienced complications related to his lungs and struggled with bouts of pneumonia, something that affected his ability to perform long sets and travel as often as he wanted. These issues, combined with the natural wear of a lifetime of touring, gradually slowed him down. Though he never officially announced retirement, his final health struggle, the seizure and pneumonia that took him, wasn't a sudden decline. It was the culmination of years in which his body had begun giving signs that it could no longer match the unstoppable spirit that had carried him across continents for decades. Despite these challenges, he always sought alternative treatments, natural remedies, and the holistic healing traditions he had embraced throughout his life. His family supported him through every phase, standing beside him even when the fight felt impossible. Jimmy Cliff's career mirrored the ups and downs of his personal and physical journey. When he first began as a young boy singing in the hills of St. James, Jamaica, He carried nothing but ambition and a voice that felt destined to cut through the noise of a world not yet ready for what reggae would become. His early move to Kingston was a gamble, a leap into the chaotic music scene where young hopefuls often slept in studios, lived on pennies, and relied on luck and persistence. Jimmy had all. He broke in early, securing attention from influential producers and earning his first hits before he was even 18. But his career was not smooth. After achieving recognition in Jamaica, he moved to England to pursue broader success. The foreign environment was harsh, demanding, and difficult to navigate. As a young black Jamaican artist, he struggled with loneliness, cultural isolation, and the pressure of representing a musical style that many people outside of Jamaica still didn't understand. Some of his early international releases didn't chart as expected, leaving him discouraged, yet he refused to quit. He continued to write songs that came from his soul, rather than from what the market expected. Everything changed when he starred in and helped shape the soundtrack of The Harder They Come. The film turned him into a cultural icon and became one of the pivotal works that introduced reggae to global audiences. His songs weren't just hits, they became anthems. The world began to view him as a symbol of struggle, resilience, and truth. But even success carried challenges. As reggae grew in popularity, new artists emerged, and Jimmy found himself sometimes overshadowed by the meteoric rise of others. While he remained respected, the industry shifts often pushed him into the background, forcing him to reinvent himself repeatedly to stay relevant. There were moments when record labels doubted his direction, moments when he felt misunderstood, years when he did not receive the full credit he deserved for the global expansion of reggae music. But every time the industry underestimated him, Jimmy returned stronger, experimenting with new sounds, rock, soul, world music, gospel, bringing reggae into spaces no one else had imagined. He collaborated with artists across genres, recorded albums that reflected new phases of personal and political growth, and continued to tour with the energy of someone half his age. The ups and downs of his career aligned with the personal transitions he went through. He was known to be deeply spiritual, often exploring different belief systems, philosophies, and cultural practices. These explorations sometimes took him away from the spotlight as he chose to focus on internal growth rather than commercial success. His personal relationships were private, intentional, and protected from media attention. Jimmy Cliff was a man whose public image was large, luminous, and iconic, but his private life was built around simplicity, family, and reflection. His marriage to Latifah Chambers was one of the most stabilizing forces in his later years. Though she remained out of the public eye, she was his foundation, the person who grounded him when fame became overwhelming and when health challenges threatened his ability to continue working. Their relationship was marked by devotion, mutual respect, and a shared love for family. Together they raised children who inherited his artistic spirit and global perspective, each carving their own path in creative and personal fields. Jimmy also had children from earlier relationships, and he maintained close bonds with them. He often spoke about how fatherhood softened him, brought him clarity, and inspired many of the songs he wrote later in life. He was proud of the ways they blended creativity with their own identities. In private, he was known to be a gentle, affectionate, sometimes humorous father who valued conversations and wisdom sharing above all else. Despite the pressures of fame, he carried his humility with him everywhere. At home, he cooked, told stories, meditated, wrote poetry, and spent time in silence reflecting on life. He believed in service, in humanity, and in the idea that music should uplift rather than merely entertain. This philosophy guided him, shaping his choices even when they weren't always the most commercially strategic. In the later stages of his life, when health issues began taking a stronger toll, he mellowed even further, choosing to focus on peace, family, and gratitude. Though he continued to perform and record, he also cherished quiet evenings, spiritual practices, and long conversations with his wife about legacy, meaning, and the next chapter of his soul's journey. Those close to him recall that even on difficult days, even when breathing became harder or fatigue settled deep in his bones, he still hummed melodies, still thought about future projects, still believed he had more to give. His death marked the end of a legendary run, but it also illuminated the strength behind all the private battles he fought. The world saw the star, the performer, the cultural icon, but his family saw the man who overcame illness, overcame doubt, overcame isolation, and kept moving forward. They saw the man who loved fiercely, who stayed curious, who believed in unity, and who taught his children that the measure of success was not fame, but purpose. And when his daughter Nabiyah stood before everyone at his funeral, she carried all of that with her, the weight of a legacy, the intimacy of memory, the impossibility of saying goodbye to someone who felt larger than life but was in the end simply her father. Her tribute was stunning, not because it was polished or performed, but because it was raw, real, vulnerable. She spoke about the man who sang her to sleep, the man who taught her about perseverance not through speeches, but through the way he lived. The man who believed that music was a responsibility, not just a career. She spoke about his laughter, his wisdom, the way he could sit in silence and make you feel like you were exactly where you needed to be. She didn't talk about chart positions or accolades. She talked about the moments that don't make it into documentaries, the small, sacred, ordinary moments that define what it means to truly know someone. And in doing so, she reminded everyone in that room, and everyone who would hear her words later, that legends are also human, that behind every anthem is a person who laughed, cried, struggled, and loved. Jimmy Cliff lived a life that cannot be contained in career highlights alone. It was a life shaped by inner endurance, physical challenges, spiritual evolution, and the constant push to create something meaningful for the world. His legacy is not just in his music, but in the way he navigated hardship with grace, the way he rose each time he was knocked down, the way he remained true to himself, even when the world tried to define him. His story is one of resilience, from health struggles to industry obstacles to personal reinvention. His presence will continue to be felt in every corner of music culture. The man who sang of rivers, struggle, and triumph lived all those realities, and in doing so, carved a path that will echo for generations. The world will continue to play his records. Streets will continue to echo with his melodies. His words will continue to offer guidance, healing, and strength. But for his family, the silence left in his absence will be a different kind of sound, one filled with memory, devotion, and the eternal imprint of a man who gave everything he had to both his music and the people he cherished. Jimmy Cliff was more than a star. He was a beacon, and now, though he has crossed over, his light remains. His wife's final words captured a truth that every fan, every friend, and every lover of reggae already knows. See you and we see you. Legends do not disappear. They transform, they rise, they echo forever. Jimmy Cliff's life was a testament to what it means to rise, fall, rise again, and keep singing through it all. His daughter's tribute reminded the world that behind every legend is a father, a husband, a man who loved deeply and lived purposefully. And in that reminder, his legacy became even more powerful because it stopped being about fame and became about truth, about the kind of life that leaves an imprint not just on culture, but on souls. That's the legacy Jimmy Cliff leaves behind. Not just songs, not just awards, but a roadmap for how to live with conviction, how to love without limits, and how to keep singing even when the world tries to silence you. And that, more than anything, is why he will never truly be gone.